And let me just open my project. So maybe what we'll be doing is creating a counter function that keeps count of the number of enemies that the player has destroyed. Okay, I think we have an EU here. If you're just going to force mode itself, probably you have some ages for code. Okay, it says there what reference exception, object reference to an object, and you mostly get this almost every time. Yeah, I get every time. So mainly what this is trying to tell you is you are accessing something that you haven't referenced. For example, now maybe I'm trying to access the component of a game object from a script, whereas I haven't, actually attached the game object. For example, now I created a public game object for in the script, and I'm trying to use some component from that game object, and I haven't actually assigned it in the editor. So let's try and sort this out. It claims this is from object pooling, so it's attached to this object pooling. When we have the enemy to have assigned, I can't find any to have it there. Then dot get an enemy. It's unable to get an enemy. Let me try and refresh this. Okay. So what might be the EU? Let's try that again. So it's the same EU. How could be wrong? Now what? Let's just check the script. We double click on this into the so yeah, it's saying the problem is there. So okay, this code mainly says if an enemy is not active, which means the code enemy that we haven't used, is return the enemy. So it's either it's not pulling the enemies at all, or we are using more than the number of enemies that have been pulled. So we must take as that is, and then let's see. Are we creating the enemy in the start? Yeah, we're in that. So let's just check if we're actually pulling the enemy. If we just actually use this video session for debugging. So let's check if we are actually what do we create the enemy? Create enemy, create enemy. It's taking the enemies here. Usually private, I can't see that. So let me just realize that we are able to put one like this. I want to be sure it's actually pulling the game object that starts. Mainly, yeah, it's normal when you write codes, you encounter errors. Just tend to find the error, solve it, and not postpone them to later because you're in something like every time. Okay, so why is this nice post saying on my here? You know what? I'll just find it again. Okay, now it says argument is out of range, index was out of range, was not connection, which means we're trying to access more than the number of enemies we have put. Okay, yeah, good. The enemies are actually being pulled. That's great. We are trying to access okay, for example, now we created let's say 10 enemies and you're trying to access the 11th element. No, that's when you actually get this kind of errors. And where is that happening? Okay, good. The same thing. So this code creates okay. So where's the issue? Where's the issue? You know what? Let's go back to the issue. Let me check differentiate manager. Okay, so I took about 3 minutes of screen just to go out what was wrong with my code. So mainly the issue is, if you notice there while we are pulling the game object, we are creating the enemies at start, and at the same time in the differentiate manager we are trying to access the enemies at start again. Now you should notice this please. the way Unity runs its code, it calls the await function first, then it calls the start function. So it calls the start function. So now I basically want to actually use this. So I must have discussed in my last video that if you want to access a component, a game object, at the start of a function, you must have actually initialized that particular game object at its own await. For example, now let me use this as a case. We are trying to access enemy clones from a script. A script is creating enemy clones. Another script is accessing those enemy clones. Now, I was initially creating these clones in the start function in the script object pooling, and then in the script instantiate manager, I was also accessing it at the start function, and that was where the URI is. Whereas the best thing would have been to create these objects to pull them at the await. So once I put them at the await, Unity first, is able to create this particular pull object. And after that, I can then access it via the start of the instantiate manager. So if we should see that in working now. So if I should move this create enemy clone from the the object pooling. So create enemies from object pooling, you should move it to await function, and you should save your script. So and you go back to Unity. So let's wait for that to load up. And you should run your code. It should work perfectly now. So great. Now, so once the player collides with the enemies, they disappear. So now what we'll be doing, okay, I think this is mainly because I'm not sure if the player has a rigid body. Let's check. The player has a rigid body of mass 10. Okay, we could freeze the position and the rotation. So let's say I can freeze the rotation and even freeze the position on the y-axis, so it won't move up. So we won't have that effect of the player flying up again. Okay, I think I'm on top. Okay. So the Z is actually pointing at me. If we could rotate the view, the Z should be pointing away. Now you could have the right movement. So yeah. So now what we want to do now is for each enemy that the player touches and the enemy is destroyed, or should I say deactivated in our case, we want to keep a count of it. So we're writing a simple function for that. So let's create them. Okay, now there are several ways we could do this. We'll be doing it via this method. Anytime the player collides with a game object that is stacked enemy, we would want to increase the counter. So for the enemy killed. So let's just work it that way. So now what I'm basically saying is anytime the player collides with an enemy, then on this collision it should call a function. It should call a function called, let's call it increment enemy killed. So increment enemy killed. You should call the function increment enemy killed. And what does increment enemy killed? What does the function do? It simply increases the number of enemy killed. So mainly that's what the function will do. And then after we have implemented it, so okay, so while we are implementing it, we should have a UI manager that does what? That updates the value of number of enemy killed. So we are incrementing it actually. That's the increment operator. Now, how would the UI do this? It's simple. The UI only needs access to what? to a text game object, either TMP or just a normal text. So once we create a public game object text mesh for normal text, so now we would access the dot text of this, which means just like normally accessing just like the text. So now I would update this with what the number of enemy killed. So the UI manager would get the number of enemy killed, show it at the user interface. So it's simple. How this would work would we actually be implementing this in our next video. Is that the player, once it collapses the enemy, if the enemy is an enemy tag, we are mainly doing this because in your game you naturally have several game objects. So once the person confirms if the player is colliding with the enemy, so checking the enemy's tag. We will also talk about tags in our next video. So now once it does that, it will call a function called increment n number of enemy killed. What increment number of enemy killed simply does is what it increases the number of enemies that has been killed. And now the UI manager, or should I say the UI script, would need access to the number of enemy killed and then display it to us, so the user would actually see this on their screen. So see you in the next video. Thanks.